Come, imagine with us.
Can and may we, in present-day Berlin, imagine a Middle East unified in peace and equality?
Across national borders and religious and lingual divisions.
With literature, discourse, and music.
Cinema, performance, poetry, special feminist and queer discussions.
The 4-day Middle East Union Festival, with guests from all over the world, makes this vision seem within reach and invites you to freely explore ideas of utopia.
Come, imagine with us.
Hello everybody, thank you so much for joining us for another panel at the Middle Eastern Festival. Middle Eastern Union Festival. We are on the second day, and we have a wonderful panel today about the Environmental Majlis, a council talking about the environmental challenges of the Middle East in the future. The moderator of the panel is Ala Obeid, who's also a curator in the festival. Ala holds a bachelor degree in environmental science and a master's in water resources management from TH Köln. She's an activist who's passionate about environment, justice, and human rights. She's currently doing a lectureship at the TH Köln to research local knowledge and climate change adaptation, and she will host a panel and introduce the panelists. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions, please look at the Facebook event and send us in the discussions the questions, and we will transfer it to the panelists.
Thank you, Hila. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our panel. My name is Ala Obeid, and I have two great guest speakers with me that I personally watched talk few times. And I had the pleasure to also have a workshop with Rena and Sami. First, we have Rena Kidem. She is an environmental peace entrepreneur. She works and teaches in the fields of international development, conflict, and environment. She works and organized projects with Palestinians, Jordanian, and Israelis for 2 decades. And she is a co-director of Jordan-Israel Center of Environmental Cooperation at the Araba Institute. And also we have with me Sami Awad, and he is the founder and program director of the Holy Land Trust. He's also working a lot on conflicts and nonviolent resistance. He's also a great speaker, and I'm very happy to have both of them today. And yes, I would like to now give the mic to Rena and Sami, and I would like them to tell us about themselves. And yeah, and I'm looking forward. And please tell us where you are joining us from today. I'm here in Haifa. And yeah.
Great. Thank you, Ala. And thank you to the Middle East Union Festival for this great undertaking that you are doing. I think this is a very important discussion that is starting at this festival that needs to continue, of course, beyond the days of the festival itself, as we move and shift into new realms and new realities of what life looks like in the future, and especially the future of the Middle East that we all live in and love so much. My name is Sami Awad, and I'm actually talking to you today from my home in Beit Jala, near Bethlehem in the West Bank. I'm really happy to be with you. And I'll just give a little introduction about myself and the work that I'm doing before we also go deeper into the topic that we are in. And I'll try to, of course, mention the topic because it is one that is also very important for us in the work that Rina and I are doing. So my story is, I come from a Palestinian family. Both my parents are Palestinians. My father is from Jerusalem, and in 1948, his father was killed in the 1948 war, and the family became refugees. They were actually physically kicked out from their home and became refugees. My grandmother with 7 children, the oldest was 12 and the youngest was 2. And the reason we are in Bethlehem is because my grandmother had a brother who was living here, and she came, like many refugees, thinking it was temporary, to stay with her brother and then return to her home in Jerusalem. That has not happened yet. And my mother is from Gaza, from the Gaza Strip. And I'm sure many of you know and hear about the very, very difficult situation of Gaza. And I still have all of my mother's family living in Gaza until this day. And I always ask people to keep prayers and to keep aware of the situation of the people in Gaza, not when there is escalation in conflict, but continuously to be aware, because life is very, very difficult on a daily basis for the people that live there. My story is I was born in 1971, so this is after 1967. And so my life as a Palestinian was living under the Israeli military occupation. And the struggle that I participated in from my youngest of age is the struggle that many Palestinians struggle in, which is ending the occupation, self-determination, freedom and justice, and living in peace with our Israeli neighbors. This is a struggle that has been going on for decades and decades, and sadly has been marked with a lot of violence and a lot of death and a lot of destruction all of these decades. At the same time, this was a struggle, but I grew up in a family that actually truly believed in the possibility of peace. Despite what we faced as a family in 1948, my grandmother always insisted that as a family, we will always seek peace and reconciliation with those who did this to us. And that was the seed that she planted in her children and us as grandchildren as well. And the hero of the family is actually an uncle of mine. His name is Mubarak Awad, who in the 80s opened a center in Jerusalem to train Palestinians and to work with Israelis on nonviolent resistance and activism. He was even known as the Gandhi of the Middle East at that time, because he fully believed that as Palestinians, we do have the right to resist and end occupation, but the best approach to end occupation and achieve peace is not by using violence, but by engaging in nonviolent resistance and activism. So the culture that I grew up in is a culture that has always been committed to nonviolence as a means to achieve peace in this land. A big turning point happened in 1988 when my uncle was arrested by the Israeli authorities. And because of his work in nonviolence, he was actually deported, kicked out from the land that he was born in and his ancestors lived in, and never allowed to return and live here again until this day. And that was the time that I committed my life to studying and engaging in this work of nonviolent resistance and activism. I ended up in the United States to continue my education, where I received a bachelor's degree in political science, then did a master's degree in peace and conflict resolution, and came back in 1998. I started the organization called Holy Land Trust. And this organization was created during the years of the Oslo peace process. As many people know, when Palestinians and Israelis were finally sitting on the table together negotiating a peace treaty, a settlement to end the conflict, end occupation in a framework known as the two-state solution. And many, many of us on both sides were really excited for that potential, that finally, as we approach the second millennium or the closing of the second millennium, we will be able to start the third in peace in this land. At Whole Land Trust, initially, our work was to really bring Palestinians and Israelis together at the grassroots level to engage in what was happening at the diplomatic level, because most of the negotiations were happening at the top level. We felt that people-to-people engagement was also very important to do. It's not just what the politicians agree, it's how the people actually know, are aware, endorse, and advocate for peace as well. We cannot just have treaties between countries. And as we know very well in the Middle East, we do have treaties between countries, But this is at the political, economic levels. When it comes to people engagement, most Israelis may have never met Egyptians, for example, or Jordanians, or vice versa. So you cannot just have peace that is just diplomatic peace, political negotiations. You need grassroots engagement. And this is what we started working at as an organization. Sadly, by the year 1999, 2000, the negotiations ended, and we fell into a very violent period known as the Second Intifada, the Second Uprising. As an organization, we very quickly picked up the mantle of nonviolent resistance and activism, and we became a leading organization in the work of nonviolence. Training, building strategies, organizing demonstrations, protests, again, working jointly with Israelis and Palestinians to try and end occupation. And everything we were doing was aimed to achieve the political aspirations where the negotiators or the politicians failed. So our nonviolence was aimed at Israeli settlements, Israeli checkpoints, military installations, and by 2003, the building of the separation wall that still, of course, exists and continues to grow in this land. At a certain point in our development and growth as an organization, we began to understand that, again, even working at the grassroots level, peace is not just about achieving a political solution. There is much more depth to engaging in peace work that hasn't been addressed, and we need to address it. And I know this is not the panel for this, but I'll just mention the two components that we work on, in addition to the environmental one, which I will speak on, which is the need to address the collective trauma that both of our communities engage in. And as we are talking also to an audience in this festival that is launched from Germany, I think this is a topic that is very, very well known, and that if we don't address collective traumas of our communities, we will never be able to achieve peace. Trauma and fear are key motivators of how we as humans behave, how we identify ourselves, and how we identify the other. And if there is fear from the other, that means there is mistrust of the other. And if there is mistrust of the other, there cannot be peace with the other. So this is one component of our work. A second component of our work is in transformation. And the core of that is we need visionary leaders for the future. Even when we look at the peace process itself, we actually can see that a lot of what was motivating the negotiatings themselves were leaders who were interested in their own political agendas on both sides. They were negotiating in terms of how much each can gain out of the process, how much each can gain out of the negotiations, not how much we can share out of these negotiations. And so part of what we work on and continue to work on is the need to develop visionary leaders for the future that can not just create and sustain, but can promote peace in a way that advocates for the rights, equal rights of all peoples in this land. The third component, which we are engaging in, is the environmental component. And I have to be the first to admit and to confess that when we started the organization, yes, there is always this global environmental issue, but the focus always goes towards the political issue. Once we achieve the political issues, then we could deal with the environmental issues. Yes, pollution happens here. Yes, there is bad water here. Yes, there is land here that is not clean and dealt with. But continuously, we ignore the environmental, ecological issues. And for me, I would say, especially in the last 15 years, it was a big awakening to actually begin to realize that we actually have to put the ecological, environmental issues on the forefront of achieving peace, not as the secondary. The fact is that the occupation itself creates a lot of destruction. Palestinians and Israelis continuously on a daily basis create a lot of destruction to the ecological system, to the water, and to the environment. Ignoring the environment is a means of destroying the environment. We cannot just ignore it and say we'll deal with it later, because on a continuous basis, we are causing destruction. So as an organization, and I would say it was a big part of it was looking into the global climate crisis that we are all experiencing and have been experiencing for decades. but also I would say, the pure honor of connecting with indigenous communities from all around the world that deeply understand a relationship to the environment that sadly in even mine and our Western approach, we have completely lost. To really begin to see the sacredness of connecting to the land, of the sacredness of connecting to the water, that the environmental issue is not an issue to be negotiated. How much water you get and how much water I get, again, fighting over through power in terms of what I can get out of the resources, but to go in humbleness and service to the resources that are provided to us by this planet, by this earth. And so connecting to indigenous communities, participating, and I'm sure Rina and I will talk more about this, in a global conference and gathering called Defend the Sacred, which was an initiative that was launched by the indigenous communities of what is known as Turtle Island or the United States, where it was about defending the rights of water for these indigenous communities and for all people in an area called Standing Rock, where an oil pipeline was being created. And that created such a shift and motivation for many of us, especially political activists, to begin to combine the environmental issues and the resistance with ecology. So there is sacredness and activism that come together. When you are just engaging in activism, you are engaging in it many times from a place of fear, many times from a place of anger and hatred. But when you begin to connect spiritually to activism by looking into ecology and the environment, then your resistance, and not just your resistance, but also your vision for the future, actually also evolves as well. And part of what we have initiated now is a local Palestinian-Israeli branch of Defend the Sacred. And maybe I'll end by saying, this is maybe something that the Middle East Union can actually look into for us to develop a regional Defend the Sacred ecological alliance here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sami. Now I will give the floor to Rina to speak about herself and give us a little bit of background and tell us where she's also talking to us today and a little bit about her journey.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Rina Kedem, and right now I'm actually traveling. So normally I live in a small community next to the border with Jordan called Kibbutz Lotan, which is a kind of eco-environmental intentional community. And right now I'm somewhere around Netanya. So I also apologize in advance if my internet has problems. I will be switching between devices, but hopefully all will be well. And I want to thank you, Alan, for the organizers of this Middle East Union, because it's a very different initiative. And Sami and I spoke about this, that we get invited to speak in different engagements. And the reason this one was so interesting, that it's not only about the now, but it's actually about dreaming the future as well. And in our work, I feel here in the Middle East, many people have forgotten to dream or are scared to dream what it will look like the day after. What will it look like to live the life we want to live without having any excuses and nobody to blame anymore. So, and what happens when it's all up to us to get there? So thank you for initiating this event and this panel. And as you said, I'll share a little bit of my journey, which is, I love listening to Sami and always see where we meet and where we have different stories and where we weave in our histories. So I was actually born in the States to a Syrian mother who ran away from Syria when she was 16, Jewish, growing up in Syria, and to a Christian father who grew up in Louisiana and converted later on to Judaism. And this mix of cultures and identities had a big impact on my life. I had a lot of curiosity of the stories I heard, and also the differences I experienced.
We are losing Reina.
I think
She
we
had a
lost
bit of,
her.
yes, we lost her a bit when she got to the interesting part.
Here she is.
Okay, I'm sorry. Where did you lose me?
About actually after the mix of culture and growing up in different,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. So I just said that that was a pivotal point for me, because I observed a lot of the different cultures around the world, and it sparked a curiosity also to what happens when cultures do not understand each other. That was a lot of what I learned, is about cultural misunderstandings and how crucial it is for a well-being of people and families. And from a very young age, my biggest love was nature. That was actually my saving grace as a teenager, as a young person. Looking back, I think it was my therapeutic space to be alone, to talk to God. I remember when I was 10 or 12, I had a little hill that I called my little God hill, and I would go and speak to whatever is bigger than me and establish a different relationship. And that love became very strong when I was a teenager, and sense of environmental activism. And there was a very specific moment where I was hiking. Eventually my parents divorced. I think the cultural differences were actually too big to bear, if I'm asked about it. And my dad returned to the States, and I just started visiting and going back and forth between the States and Israel. And one time I was hiking in Alaska with my brother and my father. And a very specific moment, I was hiking up a mountain, and I felt like a vow just slipped into my heart, saying that I am promising to do whatever I can to protect the natural world that I completely fell in love with. And I started exploring the environmental world from all different aspects of biology, marine biology, animals, but as a teenager, and starting to be an activist in animal rights, etc. And that was my biggest passion. And slowly, I started understanding that a lot of my activism was actually fueled by anger and frustration. And Sami spoke to that too. And when I grew up a bit and learned more about the activism communities, I saw more of that around me, of people being fueled, same as I was, from anger and from grief, and the feelings of strong injustice. But something about it didn't feel right. And I'll share that at the same time, I did do the army service in Israel. I grew up in a very patriotic, small community called Omer in the south. So going to the army service at the time was not a question. I was training fighters as a woman. And it was towards army service I became humbled to realize that I actually don't know enough about what I was serving. And I started asking questions. And right after my army service, I was marking hiking trails in the Judean deserts all over the country pretty much. But it was the first time I met Palestinians in the Judean desert. Sometimes it was Palestinian men when I was hiking alone as a woman. Sometimes it was women taking care of their camels. And these moments, a few times, I had to constantly choose between fear or trust on my path. Not necessarily as a Jewish person, but as a young woman traveling alone in the desert. But a specific moment I felt was where I had to choose between these two, when I encountered 8 men sitting alone in the desert who invited me for a meal. And in that moment, I knew that this choice, I had a feeling it would be an important one. And I decided to sit with them, to answer their invitation and sit with them for a meal. They just slaughtered a chicken for a celebration. I ate with them, broke bread with them, and kept walking. And in these moments of hiking the land and getting to know the land, I also I encountered Palestinians for the first time, and I also realized again that I don't know much about the stories of the people of the land. And simultaneously on my team were people from settlements, what we call the hilltop youth, very extreme right-wing settlements in the West Bank. And at first, I was definitely confused and stricken by these extremities I was experiencing. But soon enough, I felt that what my task was is to explore the land through my feet and my eyes, and to learn the stories and different narratives through story, to collect the experiences. And I would go travel to settlements, travel to Palestinian villages, hike, hitchhike, work together, and just learn about the stories. And this is when I fell in love with this crazy holy land. And at the same time, when I was hiking the land, there was one thing that was in common to Palestinian areas and the Jewish areas, which was litter, garbage, pollution. Everywhere I walked, that's what I saw. I remember marking a hiking trail of the Kidron Wadi, which flows from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea, and it was bubbling green and smelly. And everywhere I walked, that was the common theme. And I was like, wow, we are such hypocrites. We are all fighting for this land, calling it holy, but then trashing it and treating it the way we are. And that felt so wrong. And slowly, with several more experiences and travels around the world, soon enough, I realized that I want to merge my love to nature and this growing love I felt to the people of the land, to Palestinians, Israelis, and our different stories. And that's where my dream became to create an eco-community for Palestinian, Israelis, and internationals. And long story short, I encountered the community of Tamera and the Peace Research Village and the Arava Institute. And together with Arava Institute alumni and also with the support of Sami and other friends, we created EcoMe Center, which was a home for peace and ecology in the West Bank, with a vision of being open for all people without needing permits. And the center was an active place for about 8 years, also controversial because the only land we found was rented through a settler in the West Bank. And in and out, I founded this initiative with friends, and I was in and out doing my own track of studies, a master's degree in international development, after a bachelor's degree in environmental studies. And part of my master's degree, I actually went and lived in Sakhnin with my family, which is an Arab town up north here, in order to really understand the Palestinian narrative of 48 and what it is to live in such a village on my daily life. And it also taught me a lot about the peace work that is needed between Jews and Palestinians within the borders of 48. And I continue this journey when what kept knocking or following is that I don't want this activism to be fueled by anger, because I was seeing war everywhere. We see it everywhere here. I never wanted to add more war and more fighting. Fighting for peace never really spoke to me. So these understandings led me to explore the more holistic realms of peace work, understanding that there's a lot of work I need to do on myself to understand my own fear, my own anger. And I started doing that through movement, the 5 rhythms specifically in Boulder, Colorado, and slowly fell in love with indigenous practices in New Mexico, and also with the Lakota tribe of North America. And I can say honestly that indigenous ways have a big part in healing my warrior heart. And slowly enough, I realized there's a way to keep merging this work through the environmental peace work that I was doing. And I call it environmental cooperation, because I think peace has become very controversial and politically charged. And in the opposite way of Sami, I was focusing only on environment, but understood that I cannot ignore the political reality and the political issues. There is no such thing. The environmental issues are not apolitical. They are not neutral, like many want to think. Land, water, biodiversity, it is all part of the political discourse. And I think when Sami and I joined forces a few years ago, we started working together. We realized that this is a very productive combination of the work of trauma and the depth of healing and transformational experiences that is needed in order to step forward and dream a new Middle East, together with a very tangible projects and outputs of working with communities and working on environmental topics. So I would say that what I bring to this is a lot of the experience of working with communities where they are the ones who lead the destiny and the future. So when I encounter a community in a project, we explore together, we map together the problems that we face, the environmental and social problems, and we start mapping and prioritizing them to then form a certain strategy and to then choose a project and implement it. And that's the work that we've been doing in the past few years. And the sacred activism, or what we call it, it's a big name and the name actually doesn't matter. But what I want to say that matters is that without the relationship with something bigger than us, this work is very sad or very challenging, I could say personally. That my relationship that I've been cultivating these past few years, creating trust with creation, has been an anchor in the ability to cross boundaries day in, day out, my own personal boundaries, listening to opinions that are completely different than my own, failing time and again, saying that this peace work has no future, getting up, finding new strategies. And in our work, we're also integrating that is what does it mean to be in relationship with the elements, in relationship with oneself, with each other, and with that is around us, and finding the language of our people here, not only Western concepts of New Age, activism, etc., but what does it look like here? What does it mean to sit with a farmer that never left his land, to sit and drink coffee and be quiet and experience that is bigger than us? I think I'll just end with that I feel very fortunate that I am able to find ways to care for that I love, which is the water, the earth, and the people of this place and everywhere where this general earth, and that finding these ways to do that have been a blessing. And these strategies are part of what we're going to explore here together in this time. So thank you for having us.
Thank you, Rina and Sami, for your, you were able to summarize your long journeys in this work. Of course, this panel, we're going to talk about, the future of the Union within the Middle Eastern Union, but environment is a huge aspect. We cannot just only talk about how we will culturally be connected, politically and socially, but we have to also talk about our future with all the environmental challenges that we have, like climate change. We're talking about something that is happening to Mother Earth. We're all gonna feel it. We're all are part of it. And we're all kind of the cause. And I wanted, I wanted to speak about this very important thing that, okay, yeah, if we are gonna have a Middle Eastern Union in the future when most of our political issues and are, let's say, figured out, it's very important that we have to establish a union, environmental council, that we can discuss our environmental challenges, and we will imagine this world where states, Arab states or Middle Eastern states come together, have no borders, and sit on a table and discuss how can we agree on making a mechanism to, of course, manage our natural resources, our sacred and natural resources that are not enough. We have a lot of challenges. How will we manage our water and energy and, adapt to climate change? Through your experience, of course, your experience was mostly political and social justice and environmental justice. And I would like to know more about your experience. What are the values and what are the lessons learned from your journey that can come and we can use in this establishment of this new environmental union, let's say?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And I'm actually very, very happy that this panel is happening and this discussion is happening, even as the vision of a union is emerging. And as we know, and as you said it, and as we've talked in the past, most of our engagement is about addressing the human factor. And the human factor is political, economic, and social. And we think that if we address these issues, then everything else will be fine. And I think the biggest lesson for me is actually that we need to put the ecological and environmental issue on the forefront of any negotiations, any discussion, any vision work for a future Middle East Union. It has to be the initial conversation, and everything. I would challenge those who are engaging in the other fields. All of them have to fit into what is created in this ecological committees or framework that is being created. Because at the end of the day, if we are experiencing energy crisis, if we are experiencing desertification, if we are experiencing water shortages, if we are experiencing pollution, then none of these other components can actually survive. We will engage in war immediately. You know, countries who are in peace with each other will engage in war over the resources. So we cannot deny that this might not happen in the future just because we have agreements. We'll have social crisis. We will have economic crisis as well. So the value I would say is that the cornerstone, and this is the opportunity, because if we who live in the Middle East are visioning and planning to have this union, we have an opportunity to not do the mistakes that other communities and countries and unions have had, where the focus was on achieving the political and economic, and then the environmental becomes the secondary issue. We need to connect with the environment in a way that addresses all of these issues. And what I mean by this, if we look, for example, at the Western approach of how they are engaging in the work with the environment, a lot of the Western thinking is coming from how do we protect the environment, how do we take care of the environment, things like carbon footprints, emissions, and so on. But at the same time, it is directly linked to capitalism and economic benefit. So this is a Western approach, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but what I would recommend is to say we need to engage in this economic approach of sustainability, of connecting to the environment, of having sound engineering and development programs that are economically beneficial and environmentally safe, but to balance this with what Rina and I have been talking about, which is very much part of the Middle East community, indigenous culture, and our connection with the land, that sadly many of the Western countries lost that indigenous connection to them. And so when we look into countries, for example, like the First Nations people, like in Africa and the Middle East, there is value in looking into our history of how, just like Rina said, how our farmers connect to the land. How in Arabic culture, when we plant the olive tree, knowing that I will not have its fruit, but I plant this tree for the generations to come. I take care of it for generations to come. How we connect with water, how we connect with earth. This knowledge, this wisdom that comes from indigenous cannot be ignored. And ignoring it, for me, is a disaster for us in the Middle East if we do this. So my recommendation is values of humbleness, values of equity in understanding resources, values of lack of greed in these resources, and lack of fear when we engage in looking into the environment, learning from the environment, economic development, political peace work, and indigenous culture at the core of this work.
Thank you, Sami.
Great. I'll continue to say that this is such an important question, and I personally research environmental cooperation around the world. That's my PhD work, and I can say that so much of the knowledge is already out there, but still there are very few successful examples. Like our ways of thinking, there's still something that has to change when it comes to the values of science, which are very, very important, science, creativity, but there's also the part of the experience. So I'll share where my biggest questions are around the environmental crisis we are at, that it's very hard to create shortcuts, meaning that some people, if you provide the scientific data of what's happening in the world and the rates of global warming and climate change, that's it. That will be enough for them and they will change. But from my experience, I was also a backpacking leader. With some people, it goes through the heart. They have to fall in love. They have to experience the outdoors in order to care for it and to put it equivalent to their own need and not to put their own survival need before that of nature. And to even see that nature has an intrinsic value by itself to exist. So I struggle honestly between how do we create shortcuts? We don't have time to take all of us backpacking and fall in love. We don't have time for that. And we don't, again, if we do create, when this union is created, yes, that should be part of the experiences. Yes, people should step out of negotiating and talking in enclosed rooms with ties and jackets and actually do it outside. Do it in the nature. Do it where the desertification is happening. Do it where the water levels are rising. Do it in the field. It's taking the laboratory work outside. It's taking the expertise of all the ones sitting in high towers to where things are actually happening, where indigenous communities or impoverished communities are suffering the most from the environmental changes of our time. And this is a different way of thinking that I have not yet seen so much in the policy realm of things. So I do believe that policy is a key. But again, I'm here to urge our younger generation or anybody with innovation to step into policy. I think part of the values that we need are innovation and policy, and again, creativity that is connected to the heart and is not afraid to look at this holistic view where social, environmental, political, economic are all connected, who are not afraid to speak about science and spirituality in one sentence. There's a new generation that is doing it. But I know a lot of my friends and peers, we want to live a comfortable life and not step into the policy realm. But I think we need that balance. But to add in realms of the value, I think I want to bring in the intrinsic value of nature itself. To me, that has to be in the forefront of a lot of our agreements and movements and union, is to see the right of nature to exist by itself and just without, we always translate it to, I'm sure many people here heard the term of ecosystem services. We try to explain environmental terms and how humans benefit from the environment. Important, and it works. We quantify it, we qualify it, it works. And together with that, we need to see the different approach of how nature has its own ability to be and where we can support that as much as we can. I want to join the values of forgiveness, to add in a value of forgiveness, which is both intercultural, but also forgiveness to us as humanity. We have done so many mistakes, and I know a lot of us are drowning in the sadness and the grief and the hearts, the open, bleeding heart from what has been happening to the environment. But also, the forgiveness is key in all of the work we do. It's forgiveness around the healing of trauma, and it's forgiveness in the trauma that we've been doing to this earth, and moving forward and finding the compassion both to our human behavior, to nature itself, and to each other. So I want to bring in those values as well. And how do we explore those in an interesting realm when we talk about policy and politics? And I know politicians, I know a few that are starting to use this language in parliament about this time for healing and forgiveness and compassion. And an environmental union needs that as well in its core, in my belief. Of course, matters of equal distribution and equal access to resources is key, as well as diffusing the impacts of climate change, especially right now. And I would say taking into account the priorities of adaptation and mitigation of climate change by local communities. So I'll only strengthen what Sami said, that local environmental indigenous knowledge is key, is also needs to be in the heart of any environmental majlis that we want to see happening. And the wealth of knowledge of this land and its ancestral lines is immense and magnificent. And we don't even have yet a bank of such knowledge. And anybody who's listening to us and wants to support that, speak to me later because it's one of my dreams and I just don't have time to do it, but creating a bank of indigenous practices and knowledges of Palestine, Israel, and the wider Middle East then to come. And I'll just end maybe with not being, again, putting water and putting what are all of these values as sacred in the center of our being is the thing I will end in. And if it's creating those connections through the religions that are also a way for people to connect, but putting those back into the realm of respect and the honor of the sacred that they are in giving us life. And I'll stop here because we can go on and on with this question.
Thank you, Rina and Sami. I think I heard, if let's say buzzwords of the core values that the Middle Eastern Majlis should have, Environmental Majlis should have, which is equity, connection to the land. I like that you also brought the sacredness and the forgiveness, and that it's not only politics and policies and plans, but actually going back to the roots and respecting the local knowledge and using it to build our own creation and structure. And I feel like you gave us a lot of great first steps towards this. I feel like it can happen based on some of your experience and this conversation that we're having. We talked a lot about social justice and environmental justice, and it's something that politicians usually don't look at. And through your experience, how can we communicate this? Like we're saying, okay, we're doing this Majlis and these are the core values that we spoke about. I would like to hear how can we bring those core values like social, environmental justice and put it out there. What type of message that you would give people that they should focus on?
Should I start, Sami? I'll start. I would say the message, and I also want to speak about strategies. I think this is a good moment, though. I think before the message, what I would like to do for a minute is for everybody who is here present with us, to take a moment and to, if you want to close your eyes or keep them open, but really take a moment to imagine one of our biggest hopes, I would say, for our personal lives and for a regional conflict that we are part of that has to do with environmental and social justice. And to feel a minute, what is that biggest challenge or that conflict that we observe, both a personal one and in the world outside of us. And then for a second to imagine, what does it feel as if that is solved? As if that, for example, in our case, that this social and environmental justice through a Middle East Environmental Majlis is actually there. And for a second to immerse myself in what does it feel like? What does it actually feel like to be in that position where years of conflict and mystery and questions of how to live in this way are suddenly solved? And we're actually feeling, what does it look like? What does it smell like? How are our conversations with the people that we work with in this environmental majlis, for example? And I'm taking a minute to envision this, to really bring it into the presence, to really bring it into our senses and our sensational experiences right now. And I want to answer that question from that point of how do we speak to each other? What have we achieved? What are we proud of? And how do we, now if we're already there and we're feeling how it feels, if I for a second look behind my shoulder and look back to the way I had to walk in order to get to this point, take a moment to look back and see what are the most important stepping stones that jump at me that I had to step on and cross in order to get to that point. And from feeling this possibility and its realness, I'll answer. So the way part of what I see that that we communicate with in such a majlis is through innovative shared decision making. Some of those ways are called sociocracy, that I love, are ways where we listen to the wisdom of a group and trust that we bring a certain piece of the puzzle and find the ways to weave our knowledge and our talk. And we make decisions in these ways together. That's one thing that I can see. If I look back at these stepping stones, I see a place where each and every one of us takes a commitment to stop blaming, to stop shaming, to stop looking for anybody outside of myself that is meant to do this or that. Not the Prime Minister, not the Minister of Environment, not this politician, but what am I doing? And what can I do to change the impacts or reduce the impacts of climate change? What am I going to do? How am I devoting the times? Time is the most precious resource, or one of them for sure. How am I using my time in one day or in 1 week? How much of it am I giving to such realms of work? And how am I doing it with being in service of it and receiving and doing it just as a volunteer and doing it because that's the work I chose to do? So I see a commitment. I see communication. I see innovative circular economics, which so much knowledge is already existing. Charles Eisenstein, many of our colleagues and geniuses around the world, we bring that into our work and we embody it. We practice it in our management of resources, both the economics, and when it comes to the natural resources, it requires more of a community, I would say community-based conservation models, where both we listen and explore a specific need or ecosystem and conservation, start fleshing out the knowledge that already exists, bringing in forth the gifts of science and innovation, and finding the way to combine those with the willingness of the local communities. I see unions and circles of community leadership joining in small circles according to specific geographic zones and having regional and then national and transnational, transboundary forums, each in their own topic. We're working on marine conservation and something called integrated coastal zone management. And we're just, as we speak, working on creating a transboundary forum for the protection of the Red Sea and its many, many attributes of how it contributes to life. And I'll let Sami continue and then I'll go on if there's more that I see.
Yeah, thank you, Rina. Yeah, for me, I just want to add maybe just a little bit to what Rina shared. Because the way I envision this is that for a strong ecological, environmental system to emerge here that can sustain also the political, economic, and social lives, and connecting this with the concept of justice, I think what really needs to happen also at the core is that systems need to also change where we live. We cannot deny that many of the systems that we have in the countries of the Middle East are systems that feed on oppression, feed on violations of human rights, feed on violence, feed on power over others. And so I think to engage in this work, I think it needs a very, very strong grassroots movement of the peoples of the Middle East coming together to stand in the face of leaders that can be corrupted, that can be violators of human rights, because anybody who speaks about issues that do not fit with the agendas of the political establishment, even in a union, will be suppressed. And so for me, it also includes the emergence of young leaders in the Middle East that have the awareness, that are ready to engage in advocacy and activism for the sake of our relationship with the ecosystem and with the environment. Human rights, we cannot deny this as an ecological environmental issue. Equal rights, gender rights. I think one of my biggest learning over the years was in meeting and connecting with strong women like Rina and others who have a sense of what it really means to connect to the environment, that sadly many of the male species have lost over the thousands of years of just seeking power and domination of the land and of the female energy as well. And so if a country or a sect or a tribe suppresses the rights of women in their community, how can they be open to understanding the rights of water and earth and land and trees in their community? Freedom of expression. How can if freedom of expression is denied and somebody goes to prison for voicing their opinion on something, how can they speak on behalf of the environment as well? So this is why putting the ecological and environmental issue on the forefront and having people advocate for this in full freedom and full voice actually allows for the domino effect to happen on all other issues as well. And so, yeah, we're talking again about a vision of a Middle East Union, and I would urge that this environmental issue be at the forefront, because if it is not, we will fall into the traps of, and I'll have to say it, and many people will get upset, we actually do have something called the Arab unions or the states that have created a union, but what is this all about? I mean, are we just adding more countries to a system that has not achieved anything for us, where politicians meet and each of these politicians or leaders are dominating their own people? And so there is an opportunity for a new vision to emerge, and this new vision can emerge when we are engaging in the social justice issues of human rights, equal rights, and gender rights, and freedom of expression, and the ecological issues of environmental justice as well.
Thank you very much, Sami and Dana. I really feel like it's actually for me personally, a very emotional topic, because I'm in the same field. I care a lot about both people and the environment, and this is the two components. And we really would like to get there, as you said. People disconnect themselves a lot from the environment, from the nature, and they think first we have to take care of our political issues, social issues, and as if it's not connected to the space that their youth life they are doing. And I really like your messages, and I feel like we already have set the ground for like the core values and the goals, and to sustain a certain function for this Majlis from your experiences. I would like to ask another, like one of those last questions. Like, can we maintain this just system of natural resource management, like whether it's water, energy, and land, and the distribution, like we see right now in climate issues, like we have seen fires right now happening in Algeria, and in Turkey, we have water problems in Iraq, we have all over the place. We are actually, the Middle East is the place where we really need an environmental Majlis more than any other place in the world, I believe. And I can, of course, picture a world where like will be an aid or a crisis response among us, and their sharing of resources. But I want to see how can we maintain this just system? And in your experience, in your work, because most of the solutions out there are not as just. Let's say it's all about where the money goes. But with all the core values that you just spoke about, I want to see what should we do to maintain a just system of natural resources.
I'll start, and I also want to, I don't know if you mentioned, and if it's okay, but if people can also write more questions in the Facebook, or are we doing that? Okay. So I'll just remind that if any of the audience have questions, you can write it, because it becomes even more interesting to hear your thoughts as well. How to maintain, you said, a just situation of natural resources was how you framed the question to me. I think that's a very tricky one, because to maintain, we'll have to start somewhere. It's not just the way it is. But I think, and we see it right now, that, you know, when some people, I think we have to really understand that what's happening with the climate change and the global warming, we see it now in the, like you mentioned, in the forms of fire and floods, and unfortunately, what happened in Germany that took the lives of many. It's here now. I think there's no more privilege for any one of us not to engage with it. And I think that's, as many of us that understand that this, it's not just for environmentalists anymore. It's not for politicians anymore. It's for every single one of us that want to keep living on this planet and care about the future of our children and our present, not even the future of our children. It's here now. And to say, Allah, there is no just system right now. We have to create it. And I want to say that in order to create it, there are good examples to learn from. So I want to go back to the value of humbleness. Sometimes in the Middle East, we think we're in the bubble and that we're in the worst case in the whole, you know, we love attention and we're kind of, we're sometimes too soaked into our own conflict and think we're very unique. No, conflict is everywhere. Environmental crisis is everywhere. Yes, this is the most, or one of the most dire situations, most scarce water resourced areas. And there are very good examples around the world of good management of resources and in a transboundary way. We can look at systems of what's called transboundary mountain governance, which is a very interesting field to learn from. There are transboundary protected areas in Central and Southern America. And there's different examples. So I want to bring back the idea of exploring and learning from what's out there. And then creating a movement like this. Environmental Majlis is not, again, just experts sitting in a room and discussing dry data. I think we're talking about creating a movement of people. And when there's a movement of people, and we speak about this a lot, Sami and I, of looking back to history, what is that one very strong motion that can create a threshold, a tipping point, where people stop being indifferent to climate change, to injustice, and change, and where many of us give our time and our lives to such causes together, and there's no way back. Where do we look and study, where was history changed, and what do we need to do in order to do that, if it's possible to plan? I mean, sometimes it just happens. But when it comes to this question of just distribution of resources, I think it requires a movement of both very talented professionals that know the information of the situation of every single resource and what's happening in terms of that resource, and a movement of people that are willing to support in planning a certain strategy and implementing it. Because the situation right now, there is no answer. Like, there are not enough resources to sustain all of the people of the world. Like, we have to change. When we say we have to change, it means also us sitting here, reduce our consumerism, reduce our standard of life, and start distributing resources in a different way. But again, I wouldn't leave it to anybody to, yes, it needs policy, but it does require all of us. So once we can dream about that just distribution, then we can maintain it through a certain majlis and through these really good practices. I won't say best, because I don't think there's such a thing, but good practices that are out there on leadership, direct and honest citizen democracy or participation, which is also and societies that don't have democracy, sometimes it's even easier to do environmental protection, but to have these core values it should be a world charter. It's not, it should be way beyond an environmental majlis, but it should be a world charter where people find a way to commit in a daily life and really understand how this is connected to our own survival right now. So we stop putting it under. And I see more and more people doing that, honestly, or seeking those ways to be more productive, more effective, more practical. And I'll stop here to let Sami continue. And then I want to go back at the end to the practical.
Yeah, so I will give a very practical example of something that we are working on now. Rina and I are heading a project called From Dialogue to Action, which is about addressing the environmental issues of Palestinians and Israelis in the midst of occupation. How can we, in a sense, resist and end occupation by looking into the environmental damage done by the occupation of this land? And one of the key components of this work we're doing is not engaging in top-down programs that we as the experts, we as the heads of the organization, or those who are in government are suggesting, imposing, or recommending what people need to do. The way we have engaged in this project is actually by us going to the communities themselves. And the community that we just finished a beautiful work with is a community called Al-Awsaj, which is an area near Jericho. And simply asking them, what is it that they want? And then this concept, as simple as it is a concept of empowering of local communities. Once a local community is empowered by us as leaders going to them and saying, what is it that you want and need to sustain your ecological living on your land? What is it that you feel is necessary for your environment to be safe and sound and healthy? What is it that you need for water to reach your land? And then we become in service of these communities. And so for me, the first act is the empowerment of the grassroots and local communities. Added to this, education and awareness become key factors in this. And I fully agree with Rina when she said education is not, giving people a class on the environment and then sending them off. It is the connection to the land. It is really creating this intimacy, I would even call it, with the environment itself. Once people are able to develop this, once people are able to feel and sense the land, the air, and the water, embody it, not just as a mental exercise of reading a book or looking at some PowerPoint, but really connecting with it, then this relationship becomes a relationship that I will work for and I will defend and I will engage in. And so what I would recommend is this engagement in grassroots mobilizing, creating connections with the environment through awareness programs, through education programs that connect people to the land. And then at the end of the day, those who live on the land, those who are benefiting from the land, those who understand the land, back to the indigenous wisdom that exists in the Middle East that we talked about, they will actually be the ones that will help us set the right policies for the future.
Thank you, Sami and Reina, for your answer. I'm asking people to send us their questions. We had nice comments from people. They liked that the message, the talk is very real and comes from an honest place and from an experience, a long experience in this topic. I would actually ask you, for me, like this is a last thing, is that what would you like to tell us about your next projects? What would you like the people to contribute? How can we support you? I would like you to tell me, what can we do to support your work?
I'll go first. Well, our work that we're doing here, as you know, and as we've introduced this, is quite unique. There's a lot of environmental work that happens, and there's a lot of political work that happens. But I think for the first time, what we are doing is combining, as we said, activism at a political level, addressing the conflict, and working at the environment at the same time. And bringing those together, we actually believe will create even new visions for how peace will be manifested in this land. This is, I think, a strong belief for us where, for example, separation doesn't work. Integration and communication and connection and building community works, because this is how the environment works. Dividing the body from itself does not create peace in the body. And then when, as mother, cutting her up and dividing her and saying, this plot belongs to me and this plot belongs to you, does not support us or the land itself. And so for us, I think working with the environment and developing trust and building relationships helps us also develop relationships of trust and respect between humans as well. And so our work is very new and very unique. And I would actually say, yes, we need a lot of support for this work to maintain itself. Developing, for example, the local Defend the Sacred Alliance in the Holy Land, Palestinians and Israelis, and maybe expanding it to the Middle East, where environmental activists and researchers and scientists and politicians and grassroots activists come together with indigenous wisdom and with spirituality and our religious texts coming together and saying, this is what we also offer the environment here, I think can be something very, very powerful and unique. And so, yes, I will say financial support to our work is very important, and also supporting us through advocacy as well, supporting us by engaging in promoting and advocating for the work that we are doing here.
Thank you. I have a question from the audience. I have a question from Eliana Vos. She said, thank you for such touching and grounding words and visions. I'm interested to hear if you think there is an on-the-ground kind of action or movement relevant to your vision here in Berlin and in general outside of Israel-Palestine. So she would like to see, probably this is part of the advocacy, part of solidarity question.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Eliana. And I would just say, sure, let's talk. I mean, I think Berlin is in an outstanding place, a resource, a hub right now in the world that people from all countries and refugees come to. So I think there's a lot to discuss and to create these alliances from the Middle East to the different areas and to explore these questions together and expand this movement of sacred activism of people resonate, and in whatever way resonates to the local context. So practical ways will be to reach out and have conversations. That's one thing. And then I have a few other, and if some of you, if you want to add to that question after, I'll add a few more practical things right now. But I think I'll start with saying one, but there are more. When it comes to practical things and what we can do both to expand and to support this work and what's needed everywhere, I think is to invest more in off-grid systems for communities in general, not only first of all, the communities that have no other option, but for all of us, I think off-grid systems of biogas, gray water systems, solar energy, and to do it in a smart way. It's not that every solar power system is definitely, we have to look at the whole life cycle of a product, yeah, but definitely to go more off-grid and to study and bring those into advocacy. Countries do not allow wastewater systems. Countries do not allow I can speak about Israel and Palestine, biogas systems have problems receiving the proper certifications and approvals. So this is something that's very, very tangible, and I think we need to move on to. Another thing is that I want to speak and urge when you said to support our work, and I think in general what we need, I think is a lot about channeling our emotional turmoil into creativity and expression. And I'm thinking about I've seen Sami was there, and I have friends who engage in aerial arts and combine together arts, movement, activist, environmental expressions together, saying that it's our responsibility now not to soak into our personal turmoil, but as much as we can, do something about it, and also keep moving and do what brings us alive. And that no matter what we will do, we know that it may change something in the long term, it may change right now, but a lot of us will keep doing it because this is what we love doing. So my call is to have more and more of us that resonate to this work to come alive, to choose to step out of whatever our comfort zones are to the level that we can. And I know it might sound kitschy, but or tacky, but to really believe that something could be different, to dream, to dare to dream and imagine and close our eyes and look at these points like we had in some of the intervals and really imagine what does it look like, but not necessarily start big, but also look into our own personal conflicts and challenges when it comes to our neighborhood, when it comes to our family, when it comes to our partnerships, and to see what are we willing to change to bring peace into those relationships. And by those commitments also, we contribute a lot to the larger sphere. And one thought I want to share, and then I'll pass it on. I was observing today a praying mantis, and I was looking at her, and they are masters of camouflage in a way that is inconceivable. And I was wondering if our work could be like that praying mantis, because many of us like speaking about the revolution and systematic change. Yes, that's a way that's also needed. But if we observe nature, so much of the beauty of change comes through camouflage, through doing what we can in a quiet way, by learning the natural systems and being them. And if many of us do it, I don't know, it's just a thought I'm sharing that gave me a lot of inspiration today, was just observing that brilliant creature and seeing how we can learn more and more to be like to imitate our natural systems. And if more and more of us do that, we can come back and live more humbly and have less and less demands and requests of our natural environment and systems that cannot hold all of our demands and needs. Passing it on to you, Sami.
And I love the idea because, in me learning and connecting more with nature, the abundance of the learning that we can gain just from observing and connecting with, and as you said, not putting ourselves at the center of it and seeing how everything serves us and how we could serve it so that it could return and serve us. But in this humbleness of connecting and learning, there is so much that we could learn from nature that is much more intelligent, sadly, than what we have become as human beings, I think. And that's why many of these creatures will actually survive us millions of years after maybe we don't exist on this planet anymore. And just to go back to that question, there is so much that is emerging globally as well. I mean, we're talking about the work that we're doing here, but there is such a big movement, and especially led by youth and women, to address the ecological, environmental issues that are facing the world. And people can join many groups that are now emerging, grassroots initiatives that are emerging. The work that we are part of is this global movement called Defend the Sacred Alliance, and it includes members and communities and activists and spiritual leaders and indigenous practitioners from all around the world, from the Americas to Africa to Asia to Europe to the Middle East. So this movement is growing. It just needs more support. And I fully believe, as we've been using this word, more engagement through humbleness and awareness creation. I think one of the biggest lessons we've learned in the last 2 years, how a very small virus can put a halt to us as human beings. And sadly, many of us have not learned that lesson yet. We still declare it as a war against the virus, as the struggle that it's us or it. And then we know at the end of the day who will win this if we engage in it as a war, as a conflict between us and the virus. And so to understand that something so small can affect us so much has to be the eye-opening for us to just stop, take a breathe and ask, okay, how can we now engage with the environment in a different way? How do we engage with water in a different way? Our greediness, our possessiveness, our control, our power, our systems that are embedded in this patriarchal system of control and domination are not going to last. They're not helping us, but more important, they're not going to last. And so the emergence of the new needs to begin now, so that we don't experience a full collapse of the system. And creating the new, envisioning the new, just like what this union is all about, I think is a key component for the future. So when we're thinking Middle East, which is big enough, but actually what we should be thinking is globally from the Middle East. If we can achieve something very new and unique in the Middle East, I feel it will have such a global effect as well.
Thank you, Sami, for your words, and Rina. I'm really hopeful, and I would ask everybody to support Defend the Sacred Aliens and start one. I mean, if you don't find one in Berlin, let's start one, and please connect with Sami and Rina and support their work. I will always follow up their work and journey, and I am also will be part of it. Thank you, everybody who was with us today, and I hope that we gave you a little bit of a vision for the Middle Eastern Environmental Majlis or Council. And yes, let's all go out from here and appreciate where we are and be humble with nature. Be humble as humans. Thank you a lot, Sami and Rina. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Come, imagine with us.